Welcome to the SportsPro podcast.
Hi everyone and welcome once again to the SportsPro podcast. My name is Owen Connolly. I'm the editor-at-large at SportsPro. Hope you're well and hope you're ready to conclude our trilogy looking at the expanded SportsPro 50mm series. This time we're taking on our inaugural list of the world's 50 most marketable sports properties. And we're going to be doing it in the company of our partner in this endeavor, Adam Mitchell, who is the global lead for Sponsor Pulse by IMI. Hi, Adam.
Hi, and thanks for having us.
Thanks for coming on, and welcome as well to you. Obviously, Adam, this is a new thing for us. We haven't taken a look at this particular category before, but there's lots to dive into. We'll get onto the list in just a second, but first of all, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to introduce Sponsor Pulse by IMI. What can you tell us about the organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So Sponsor Pulse by IMI is a sponsorship partnership global agency. So we essentially provide partnership solutions and services from start to finish, any step or every step of your partnership journey. A big part of who we are and our DNA is that all decisions and all recommendations that we make are rooted in data and in insight. And that really led to the development of Sponsor Pulse as a platform that is the basis of all of our services, where we track and measure thousands of sponsorable properties across the world on a monthly basis. And we developed a single universal currency to enable us and to enable sponsorship professionals to compare, contrast properties instantly. So that's really the basis of who we are and what we do, and we'll obviously get into it in deeper detail as we get into the list.
Yeah, so the opportunity score is fundamentally the basis for the most multiple properties list. For those of you who haven't seen it yet, you can find it on sportspromedia.com, the list that is, or on the 50mm hub at 50mm.sportspromedia.com. Top of the list, FIFA World Cup, Summer Olympic Games, the NBA, and then a couple of teams, because it's a list that combines competitions and series, promoters, championships, and teams as well. Real Madrid and Barcelona rounding out that top five. We'll get into some of those details as we go, Adam. But what's the list trying to demonstrate? What was the inspiration for it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a great question, a great place to start. I mean, our we've essentially spent the last number of decades distilling all of our global sponsorship experience down into what are the key fundamental insights that business professionals, sponsorship professionals need to have to be able to root their decision making in fact. And really, our intent is to always represent the consumer's voice. So, really, the goal of this particular list was to provide the consumer's voice and showcase where the greatest opportunities in global sports sponsorship lie, which obviously has been an industry that's experienced significant growth over the past several decades, but that has also experienced significant challenges over the past 7 months. So our hope here is to really provide greater food for thought and greater conversation starters that are all rooted in fact, that will hopefully lead a lot of the brands out there in the world to look at a lot of these different properties, which provide incredible platforms for them to grow and build their brands and connect with really high quality audiences.
And what's the methodology behind this? I mean, it's called the opportunity score, but how does it work?
So we are essentially in field conducting a study every single month with over 30,000 people across 18 of the largest markets in the world. And essentially, on a monthly basis, we go in and we talk to those consumers about different properties that span sport, music, entertainment, and cause. And we have 7 key metrics that look at three different anchor points. So we've got the behavioral side of the equation, which really provides us with the general reach and the frequency of that reach. We've got the emotional side of the equation, which is really looking at passion and affinity and excitement for different properties. And then finally, and very importantly, we've got the impact side of the equation, which is looking at among the brands that sponsor these properties, is there potential for a brand to actually see the gains that they need to be able to justify the investments that a lot of these properties require? So, is there a return on investment opportunity when it comes to exploring some of these sponsorship properties? Now, the opportunity score itself actually takes those all of those metrics into account into a proprietary algorithm, and then enables us to look at, compare, and contrast properties and the significance of the opportunity that they present instantaneously.
And how's that methodology developed? What are some of the metrics that have become more important, that have gained a more significant weighting over time?
Yeah, so I think at the end of the day, I mean, when we look at our experience in the sponsorship space and the importance of data, especially in this particular industry, I mean, we've distilled it down to look at reach and the engagement at a 50,000 foot level so that we can quantify, what is the total size of the opportunity that this particular property represents. But we've essentially created a bit of a downward funnel where we use that as our 50,000 foot level macro storyline of you can reach X number of people globally through this property. But we then get deeper into the insights to really start to quantify what part of that audience is truly who you're going to be able to speak to and likely influence through your sponsorship. And that's where some of the other metrics around the intensity, the velocity at which people engage with properties on a weekly basis or more certainly play into the equation, because suddenly you're having a conversation around the number of properties or the number of times that you can connect with an audience through a property on an annual basis. So the evolution has really been, how do we fine tune the behavioral, emotional, and impact metrics to get down and distill them down into one score that really will guide a lot of the decision making process and the valuation of different opportunities that are being presented to brands around the world, but doing so in a really quick, efficient manner.
Let's delve into the list itself. I mean, we talked about the top five. Not too many surprises in terms of there's certainly the upper reaches of the list. There's a lot of soccer there, seven in the top 10, and it's dominated by a few sports. So you're seeing kind of a almost like a gravitational pull to some of the more popular sports, and and the properties that dominate there. But what was the prevailing trend that you identified in terms of what actually came out of this list once you were able to analyze the data?
I think it's a really interesting mix of properties. I don't know that there are, as you kind of suggested, there aren't many major surprises at the top of the list when you think of global appeal, mass appeal, and thinking of 18 countries. I think the really interesting thing when you look at it at the global level is that you can see some interesting trends in terms of the team versus league dilemma and who provides the greatest value or greatest opportunity to actually reach an audience. We've seen a number of women's sports properties, whether it be FIFA Women's World Cup, the Women's Tennis Association, and the WNBA actually just missed the top 50 at number 57, which are highlighting a really significant opportunity that's thankfully and rightfully so gotten a lot more press over the past couple of months, and that certainly should continue. And there's been a lot of different properties in different sections within sport that are on the move. So whether you think of the growth of basketball and what we're seeing from the NBA, the WNBA, and some of the other global basketball leagues, whether you look at tennis and the impact that tennis has had through a lot of its celebrities. When you think of Naomi Osaka and Bianca Andreescu, Roger Federer, Nadal, Djokovic, and so on and so forth, and be able to really hold court in terms of having all of their properties list in this top 50. There's some really interesting elements that encourage people to actually think a little bit differently about their sponsorship portfolios and identify perhaps some areas that aren't always at the top of the list. I mean, I'm sure obviously there's been lots of discussion around esports and gaming globally. Another area where we're seeing some of those properties really start to rise to the top and challenge the traditional sports. So I think it's difficult to say that there's one prevailing trend out of the list. There's no question that the global games, the global events, and the beautiful game of football certainly dominate. But there are a lot of challengers that add to the list, and I think that encourage brands to explore different opportunities within the sponsorship space and to get a bit creative with the way in which they explore them.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you know, the- towards the upper end, especially, it's older properties generally, more established ones, World Cup and Olympic Games, obviously decades old, football teams that are over 100 years old. But there are some newer, emerging properties as well. League of Legends is up there as the one esports event, FIFA Women's World Cup, as well as you mentioned, which is a fair bit more recent in being established than the men's edition. In terms of properties that are gathering some momentum, what's behind that? What are they doing well? IPL is in there as well, which is another one that's kind of 12-ish years old. What's driving attention towards those properties?
No, absolutely. I think there's a number of different factors, and I think there's not necessarily a specific formula that's always going to work. I think what we've seen, I mean, the power of celebrity and the power of personalities is growing in importance, and obviously it was demonstrated through the 50 athletes list. But you look at some of those major global figures who are able to really drive a property forward, and it's incredibly significant. So, when you look at the star power behind some of these teams, some of the leagues themselves, they're certainly playing a huge factor in the growth and momentum that some of these properties are gaining. Another theme that we've seen that's really helped drive the momentum of certain properties is around the intersection of sport with entertainment and with pop culture. So whether it's looking at F1 and the Drive to Survive series, the NBA, the Chicago Bulls, and the Last Dance series that aired on Netflix, or even Formula E and the documentary "And We Go Green." Formula E was just outside the top 50, ranked at 59 in the world. But there's a really interesting element of providing consumers with another touch point and a different lens to the stories that are being told around some of these properties that certainly is resonating and driving momentum further. And then I think there's just a natural element of expansion of some of these other sports. So I mean, cricket and its ability to grow and be so significant in certain areas, and now actually expanding to other markets that provide it with huge opportunity for growth at the community grassroots level, or in just developing new commercial opportunities to connect with those audiences. I mean, you can see it throughout the list. I mean, table tennis, cricket, badminton. There are some sports that perhaps people wouldn't necessarily consider or would think would be top of mind in terms of cracking a top 50 list, but these sports are certainly there. And I think the expansion in what people or some of these sport federations are doing to develop their properties at a grassroots level across the world are certainly paying dividends and are going to be a key area for brands to consider as they look at their sponsorship portfolios and try to identify where should we be going and what are the sports of the future.
Obviously, there's a fair few teams and competitions in here that have a big historical audience and are drawing on that tradition and on that inbuilt kind of fan base. But irrespective of that scale, which properties are proving to be most effective in engaging the audience that they do have?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where there's no question when it comes to properties or the tournaments that exist that draw upon countries all over the world to participate in them, whether that be the FIFA World Cup, whether it be the Olympic Games. I mean, there's no question that those are going to be very difficult to compete against when it comes to overall reach opportunity. That said, I think that there's the intensity factor and the frequency at which people connect with the properties is really kind of the other side of the coin, where as a brand owner and somebody who wants to build their brand via sponsorship and partnership, I mean, you want to look for a property that provides significant engagement on a weekly basis or more, so that you have 52 plus connection points a year to be able to add value to that audience and intercept them and tell them a bit more about who you are. So I think what we're seeing and what we've seen when we look at intensity specifically, a lot of the teams are able to really drive strongest intensity. So they've got so many different ways to activate through the team itself, through the players on the team, through obviously a more robust year-round schedule and season and participation in several different tournaments. Those are really, I think, the greatest opportunities overall that we're certainly highlighting when you look at the way the list has played out. We certainly deal with a lot of brands in the sponsorship space who often question how much they can participate in ongoing dialogue conversation around some of these properties. But the reality is that there's huge opportunity to be a part of a relevant, compelling conversation year round. And I think that really trying to look at the intensity factor and identifying and saying, okay, I've got a property here who's a partner of mine. There's a significant part of the population that's engaging with this property on a weekly basis or more. How do I build a content calendar and an asset mix that's really going to allow me to capitalize on that exposure and add value, and not necessarily be apologetic about it? I think it's really forcing, or it forces people to think a bit more creatively about how they integrate a brand into that story. But as we've seen, I mean, people are getting more and more creative with the ways in which they activate sponsorships. And the intensity metric is one that we love to latch onto because it re-emphasizes the amount of exposure that is available. And if you can build a partnership that is relevant and compelling and adds value to the end consumer and to the audience, there's no question that you're going to be able to break through and reap the benefits of that.
What are some of the different approaches that we can identify from the data in terms of how these properties reach audiences?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple different ways. I mean, we depending on the brand, the brand's objective. Obviously, if I'm a relatively new brand to the marketplace, the way I look for and who I look to partner with is going to be different than a really well established brand, depending on what my objective is. I think the diversity and the metrics that we offer when you kind of dig deeper below the surface of the opportunity score is that you can actually look at some of those key elements and make really informed decisions and strategies around the data that's there. So, I mean, one area that we always find really interesting when it comes to the potential impact of sponsoring a property is looking at, will your sponsorship of this property drive consideration for your product or service, and will it drive favorability for your brand overall? And when you look at sports in general and the makeup of this list, you're looking at almost 1 in 5 people globally who are saying yes. So depending on what your motivation is, what your desired end state and objective is from a brand perspective, there's a lot of different ways that we can manipulate, look at the data. I think another area and another element that we certainly wanted to emphasize, to offer, is that this is the global list, the global ranking. This is weighted based off of the global population in the 18 markets that we operate in. The other layers, though, is that you can get down to a national level, to a state or provincial level. You can get down to a targeted consumer level to understand, are my core consumers, whether it be demographic based or purchase behavior based, where are they spending their time? Who are they engaging with most? And this list is dynamic in the sense that it does update to reflect those specific different consumer profiles, which, once again, when you think of the layer of sophistication and the ability for you to build a sponsorship portfolio or a sponsorship go-to-market strategy that can really tap into some very tailored and targeted insights, there's a lot of power to unlock there.
Just thinking about those different kinds of audiences, how sensitive do brands need to be to that, and what kind of things can they read into this data and into some of the scores that we're seeing across these rankings when it comes to the approach that they take, when it comes to the kind of messaging that's going to be appropriate for certain kinds of sponsorship deals?
Of course, yeah. I mean, I think there's been a significant evolution, obviously, and it's only accelerated over the last 7 months in terms of what assets different brands are tapping into and using to get their messages out there to to the audiences that are engaging with these properties. And I think that we'll continue to see that evolve as we move through the different phases and stages of this pandemic, and as we try to figure out, when is live attendance going to be an opportunity or be something that we can actually plan on in the future. I think there's an element of a lot of brands are sensitive and don't want to overstep or be too present. But I think the reality is that you're investing significantly in a property, and as long as your message capitalizes on either the passion and affinity or the excitement for that property, there certainly is a significant market, an audience that's there, that's ready, and that wants to take that message in. So I think it's always coming down to how do you strike the balance of, what's the role of the brand, the role of the property, and how do they intersect in a really meaningful way to provide a really interesting, compelling message. So I think that's always going to be the kind of the art that needs to be applied to the science. Our goal from a platform and company perspective is really to provide the science to help get you to that point and move you along that sponsorship journey to those really exciting, creative, innovative discussions.
Yeah, what are some of the examples of that you could, take out of the data and put into a more of a real world context?
Yeah, I mean, if I look at FC Barcelona and that franchise, obviously the star power that they have. If you look at what Becco has done in terms of activating Eat Like a Pro, bringing celebrities to the forefront of that conversation, a really compelling and important, relevant conversation and topic for people around the world that has a halo certainly to Becco as a brand overall and to its products, but isn't really the over the head approach. I think that's a really interesting take and stance that they've taken to establish the brand, to leverage the star power, to leverage the storied franchise, but with a really important message that's going to ring true for the audience and inspire the next generation of athletes to get active, to eat well, and to focus on their health. So I think that's one example when you look at the top five properties that certainly rings true. I think another, when you look at the Olympic Games and the Paralympic Games, frankly, which is in this top 50 list as well. And you look at Toyota and the investment that Toyota's made globally to be a significant player in both of those properties, and their focus on mobility and being unapologetic about moving that agenda forward and really offering and committing to create the next evolution of what mobility really represents. So I think there's some really interesting examples out there in the world where brands and properties have really struck a fine balance of how do we coexist and in a narrative that actually is powerful and that will support the brand, of course, but also support the mandate of the property that they're sponsoring.
Join the conversation with the SportsPro community. Follow us on Twitter at SportsPro. Find us on Instagram at sportspro.media. And connect to SportsPro Media on LinkedIn, where you can also become a part of our specialist OTT community. SportsPro, connecting and inspiring the business world of sport.
You've talked already about a couple of sports and a couple of competitions that have, perhaps a strong regional draw, the IPL, the World Table Tennis Championships. Obviously, a lot of the properties are going to be global in nature and global in appeal, but how regional are these followings based on the data that you've seen?
So, I mean, I think the really interesting thing around the top 10 properties or so is that they truly are global. I mean, I would argue the top 50 list, the properties certainly have, as you get further down that list, certainly have some regional strengths and weaknesses. But the top 10 properties are truly, global in every sense of the word. I think the really interesting thing that the data can provide as you actually look to from a continental perspective or a country by country perspective, they start to reveal significant opportunities. So obviously, we've seen over the past several years, but a growing trend of different leagues as well as teams setting up, regional offices in Asia or North America or South America to help try to establish or further establish a following. And create commercial opportunities in other areas, and we believe that that's only going to obviously accelerate over the coming years. But looking at the data from a country perspective certainly sheds light on where some of the greater strengths are. I mean, if you look at the NFL and the role that they play in the US, I mean, they're number one from almost a landslide perspective. They're the single greatest opportunity in the US. However, that doesn't seem to be true across the world. So, where are their biggest opportunities to grow and to accelerate their growth? I mean, one as a Canadian, the NHL, similar story in Canada. There's almost no single cut of data in our database where in Canada, the NHL is not the number one opportunity from a sponsorship perspective. But how do they crack the top 50 list? Where do they focus their attention on growth, which obviously we've seen from some of their initiatives that span, the Asia market and the European market as well. So I think that's where it can really start to inform strategy and identify quite tangibly from a quantitative perspective where the greatest opportunities lie and where some of these properties should and could be focusing their attention to deliver that growth.
I mean, we also have in the top 10, we've got the World Cup, the Summer and Winter Olympics, and the UEFA European Championship. How cyclical is this data generally? Is it, is there a kind of wax and wane in terms of how engaged people are with these properties? Is that factored into the data? How's that been approached?
So we are in market every month with this study on a global basis. I think one of the really interesting myths that we hear and that makes sense intuitively is that a lot of people assume. I mean, the Summer Olympic Games, the Winter Olympic Games, the FIFA World Cup and UEFA European Championship, they only come and go, every couple of years. That said, the data suggests that there's an opportunity to start and to continue a conversation around these properties year round. And we've been at this for a long time, and we continue to try and reinforce that to different brands who are partners of, or brands who are considering partnering with some of these properties because there is an ongoing opportunity there. I mean, there's no surprise. I mean, the Olympic Games obviously established the Olympic Channel, which is an amazing resource, an amazing content ecosystem to share more great Olympic content and more storylines. There's so much potential there. So the data itself is certainly representative of any peaks and valleys, but the valleys on some of these major global properties really aren't as significant as what people typically would expect. And as a result, they reveal that there is an opportunity to engage in a discussion, a dialogue with these audiences on an ongoing basis. So we're not saying necessarily, start day zero leading up to 4 years from now, the next Olympic Games or whatever it may be. But there certainly is appetite for content ongoing. So what is it, or how do you anchor your brand and the role of your brand in that property in a way that's meaningful year round? And I think that's the sweet spot when we talk about the art and the science coming together to create something really impactful.
Yeah, I mean, again, are there any examples of that you could point to?
Absolutely. So, I mean, from an Olympic perspective, and I'm certainly biased, given that I worked in the Olympic on the Olympic movement in Canada for a period of 3 or so years. But financial institution Royal Bank of Canada here in Canada actually developed a program called RBC Training Ground, and the program is an annual program that looks to identify the next generation of Olympic hopefuls and provide them with the resources and the funding that they need to get to the podium. So, talk about a meaningful way to engage with youth, which is obviously an important mandate that they have, but to do so in a really authentic, credible way where they've engaged the entire nation, they've engaged all the sport federations, and they're actually creating a path for the next generation of Canadian Olympians, which is pretty powerful and certainly a storyline that allows them to activate their Olympic investment on an ongoing basis.
Just on that point about the Olympics and the different touch points that there are for an event like that, where yes, it's a quadrennial event, or it's two quadrennial events kind of taking place in a specific place at a specific time, but you have national teams, you have athletes involved. How significant, not just for the Olympics, but for all of these events, is that kind of that network effect where athletes come into the picture, where different teams might come into the picture in the case of a competition, where fan bases have their own kind of ability to be standard bearers as well for for brands and brand communication?
The way that we look at it, and often the way that we talk about it, is just the ripple effect, which makes a lot of sense. I mean, when you have the opportunity to activate your brand, and when you can engage well beyond just the property and start to get the different teams or the different celebrities involved, is really where you see the sweet spot, where you kind of get that greater amplification opportunity, to ensure that it's hitting the audience as wide as it can, and also as many times as it can. So certainly from our perspective, I mean, looking at celebrity partnerships as another vehicle to help kind of accelerate and spread the message is certainly incredibly influential in the space. And certainly something that we always advocate for. Should there be the capital and the investment of time and money there to satisfy it.
Obviously, one other factor that I suppose bears discussion is the times that we are living through, and the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic this year. We've seen some of these teams out of action, some of these competitions suspended or postponed or cancelled for 2020. Is it possible to detect any impact from the pandemic in the data that you measured?
Yeah, so when we look at engagement specifically as that 50,000 foot kind of macro level metric to get the story started, engagement's measured by looking at the percentage or the number of people who watch a property on TV, watch it online, follow it in the news, follow it socially, bet on it, or play fantasy on it, or buy or wear merchandise supporting the property. So what we've seen, what we've detected over the last 6 or 7 months now, is a slight dip in the overarching engagement number, which makes sense given obviously the fact that a lot of these properties have had to take a bit of a hiatus. That said, when we look at excitement for the sport, and when we look at momentum for the sport and some of the other metrics, we're not seeing dips. So I think at a macro level, certainly there are some audience concerns. We've seen that in a lot of the press and the media in terms of some of the different properties seeing record lows in terms of the audiences that they're able to generate. That said, I think from an overarching perspective, when you look at as a marketer what your options are to connect with your core consumer and your target, how many marketing channels or vehicles are there out there that offer you the opportunity to connect with over 1 billion people globally? There aren't many. And sports properties are certainly one of the only vehicles out there that offer that opportunity. So I think there's been certainly some changes in terms of the audience and the overall engagement, but not as significant as what I think a lot of people would expect. And we're confident that it's going to bounce back over the coming year as things start to as we all start to adapt to a different way of living.
Are there any indications of changes in how people are engaging with these properties, or is it too early to tell? And do we need to wait until we've seen a return to something like normality before we make that assessment?
I think it'd be early. I mean, we've certainly seen some changes just based off of the way and the different opportunities and the different ways in which people can consume content. So whether it's the growth of OTT platforms, whether it's the growth of certain social platforms as a way for celebrities and teams to really broadcast their voices, we're certainly identifying some of those changes. But I think those were happening prior to the pandemic. I think based off of what we're seeing, based off of the last 7 months, there have been so many changes to the schedules that a lot of these properties have put forth to pull off the events that they've pulled off. And I think it's a bit premature to kind of suggest that any of those changes are going to be permanent or going to be less trend and more reality moving forward. I think over the next 24 months, we'll probably have a better picture as to how some of these different properties are evolving in the way that they distribute their content and get back to competition in a way that makes sense, or makes the most sense for safety of all, but also for engagement and for drawing the audiences. And I think from our perspective, in a time that's this challenging, the need to ground ourselves in data and not just knee jerk, but actually look at the data that supports why sponsorship is effective, how effective it can be, and what properties offer you and your brand the greatest opportunity. we think that there's never been a more important time to ground ourselves in that data and insight.
And finally, what else does the list tell us about what it is that's appealing to people about sport in 2020? I don't mean 2020 specifically, but I mean
Yeah.
what's appealing to people about sport, and how's the sector going to change over the next few years?
I think it's variety. I mean, as much as some of the, perhaps it's not surprising to see such a heavy weight of, the global, some of the global properties and some of the football, soccer based properties. There is a significant variety of properties within this list that certainly, from our perspective, showcases just the changing interests and the evolution of people's interests. I think the cross section of sport with music, with entertainment, with pop culture, with politics, with cause continues to be something that we see. And I think that this particular moment in time, which is incredibly volatile with everything happening in the world, has certainly just reemphasized that consumers are looking for sport to be greater than sport. And that's the opportunity that sport and the brands who sponsor some of these properties have to be bigger than just sport itself. So I think that the winners at the end of the day, and the brands and properties that are really going to differentiate themselves and continue to see momentum and growth are going to be the ones that challenge themselves to approach the global situation that we're in a bit differently, and to have a point of view, and to walk the walk and prove what they stand for and who they stand for. Like, similarly, in terms of the evolution, is the asset value and the asset mix is certainly going to be something that continues to be scrutinized. So how partnerships are developed, how they're negotiated in a way that protects both properties and their sponsors, to ensure that there's mutual benefit and a mutual exchange of value, is certainly something that we'll continue to see evolve and change over the coming 12 to 24 months, especially as things remain a bit fluid. But once again, grounding everything in data and understanding truly what the potential of the different assets and the different properties are is certainly, from our perspective, the best place to start.
Okay, well, lots to reflect on. If you are interested in reviewing the list of the world's 50 most marketable properties, or indeed the list of the world's most marketable athletes and the world's most marketed brands, you can find all of them at 50mm.sportspromedia.com. You'll also find a whole load of supporting editorial and other coverage, some of it from Sponsor Pulse too. So yeah, have at it. There's tons to go over there, and it's hopefully the start of a very interesting conversation. But this is the end of a very interesting conversation, Adam. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, guys. We certainly appreciated being a part of the expanded 50mm program, and look forward to a lot of great dialogue and conversation with people around the world around this particular ranking, and obviously the 50mm athletes and brands list as well. So we thank you guys for letting us be a part of it.
Great stuff. Well, thanks to Adam Mitchell. Thanks to all of you for listening. We'll be back with you again very soon. Bye bye.
The SportsPro podcast is published by SportsPro Media. The producer is Ed Dixon.